Before we dive in this morning, I do want to give just another little plug for the year in review. It's on the back table, or you probably got one in your email. It's just kind of a quick little recap. It's a two-sided page of some incredible things we got to do this year. And some of those are just kind of like interesting facts, and some of them are super incredible. Like, we had 12 baptisms this year. Or there's 2.5 days of YouTube videos to watch. You know, those are like totally different. So lots of information there you guys can check out. Those are on the back table. You probably found them in your email if you're on our email list as well. So if you noticed last week, and with Jordan too the week before when he talked about calling, we've been talking about the beginning of. That's kind of been the theme that I wanted to do through January here. And last week I looked at the beginning of pretty much everything, right? The beginning of the world, the creation account, and how God created everything out of nothing. And probably the coolest part of that is not only did he create the beauty that surrounds us, and we get to see it here in Wyoming, but he also made you and me. He made humans, he made mankind, and they were his greatest creation because he made humans in his image. And so we talked about the beginnings of everything right there, right, when it comes to the physical thing. I don't want to talk about beginnings again today, but before I do that, I want to tell you the topic that we're going to be talking about beginnings. I'm going to work it backwards with you. Today, I want to talk about this idea of wisdom. Wisdom. What is wisdom? Knowledge. Is it only knowledge? See, wisdom is like one of those things that we wrestle with as a culture sometimes. And there's been really smart people that have given really smart quotes about what wisdom is, right? Wisdom is the right use of knowledge. See, that's taking what Tricia said, knowledge and using it right. That was Spurgeon. And maybe you'll get something that's not so as deep and theoretical as maybe knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad, right? There's a difference between knowing something and being wise about something, or having knowledge and having wisdom. And if you've been around here for a little bit, you might remember that we've talked about wisdom in the past once or twice. We spent some time back in the summer of 2021. I gave a couple of sermons about wisdom, and that's where our opening verse actually came from, James chapter 3. When we were in the James series, we came across James chapter 3 where he's talking about the difference between God's wisdom and man's wisdom, right? And I think these two quotes are kind of a good example of how there's different levels of wisdom, right? One of them has to do with tomatoes, and one of them has to do with deep thinking. Like, there's different levels of wisdom, right? But the question is, if you know what wisdom is, and you kind of can grasp it a little bit, where do you find wisdom? Does it just appear in your brain? The Bible. That's the answer I was hoping. The Bible. Then, if somebody says, I know I can find wisdom in the Bible, but it's big, where do you send them? The middle. Jordan's getting my point here. The middle, right? Most Christians would say there's a couple of books that we have called the wisdom literature, right? So when somebody asks you for wisdom, your first answer is the best answer. Go to the Bible, right? But the inevitable second question is, where in the Bible? It's real big. And so people usually say the wisdom literature. And we would call those books Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And they take three different, very, very different approaches to sharing wisdom. Job shares wisdom by giving you the story of everything terrible happening, right? You can gain wisdom from hearing other people's life. That's what Job does. Ecclesiastes gives you wisdom by also kind of sharing what life is like and how it can be down and dirty and thinking. Deep thinking is Ecclesiastes, right? And then there's Proverbs. And most people would probably point you to Proverbs first because Proverbs is just nuggets of wisdom. Tons and tons of nuggets of wisdom. I mean, you'll find things in there that are applicable to life. I just had to pick a few. I mean, this one's pretty applicable. Proverbs 22:7. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. How does that apply to my life? When I owe somebody money, I feel like a slave. That is wisdom, isn't it? But they get a little harder to swallow than that. They keep going. Maybe a little more personal. Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Oh, come on now. I don't want to be gentle. I want to be fierce. But a harsh word stirs up anger. How often has that been true in your life? That's wisdom, right? And then they get really, really obvious and blunt. Proverbs 10:19, this is out of the NLT. Too much talk leads to sin. Be sensible and keep your mouth shut. Oh man, that one applies to me often. Shut up and listen, right? Shut up and listen. Straight up wisdom. So if anybody needs a nugget of wisdom, we go to the book of Proverbs, and we could probably find something that applies, right? But really, that's kind of the last half of Proverbs, and the first half talks about wisdom in general. Instead of having just nuggets of wisdom, it talks about the story of wisdom. And I know today's topic is going to be kind of a little weird. We don't look at this that often. But since we're looking at the beginnings of, I want to look at the beginnings of wisdom. And the book of Proverbs kind of holds the story of how God created wisdom and how God worked with wisdom and how wisdom began. So if you got your Bibles, we're going to be in the book of Proverbs today. We're going to be looking at wisdom. And more specifically, we're going to be looking at the beginnings of wisdom. But have you ever really thought about the beginning of wisdom? Have you ever wondered, like, I know this is a thing in my life, but where did it come from? Yeah? Oh, no, that's at the end of the sermon. You got to hold on. Man, you guys are ahead of me. The beginning of wisdom, right? And it's something we don't talk about often. We have a couple of verses that we really like to quote, but wisdom's been around a long time. We are studying through Genesis a lot in our one-year Bible right now, and there's some wisdom there. There's also some crazy stuff happening. But, I mean, we look at people in the Old Testament, and there was some wise guys, right? Abraham, even Noah. We can go back, but before Abraham and Noah or even Adam, before any of that, wisdom existed. Before anybody even tried to have wisdom, before Solomon was called one of the wisest people, before David had wisdom, before anybody had wisdom, wisdom was there with God before all of those guys. So where is wisdom? Where did it start? And what I want to show you today in Proverbs chapter 3 is where we're going to be first. I invite you to grab your Bibles. I didn't put everything up there. What I want to look at today and what I want us to look at is that wisdom, she has been around a long time. In fact, she's been around since the beginning of time. So if you would, grab your Bibles. Let's open up to Proverbs chapter 3 and look at wisdom for a minute. Proverbs 3, I'm going to pick up in 13. I'll probably tell you this multiple times today. To get the whole picture of wisdom, go read Proverbs chapter 1 through the end of chapter 9. It's all about it, okay? But I can't obviously read 9 chapters on a Sunday morning. But I invite you to go read that on your own. But I'm going to take some nuggets out to kind of read and share about wisdom and where she came from. Read along with me, Proverbs 3, starting in 13. This is out of the ESV. Blessed or blessed is the one who finds wisdom, the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, or profit from her is better than that of gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare to her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her are called blessed. The Lord, by his wisdom, founded the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. By his knowledge, the deeps broke open, and the clouds dropped down the dew. The beginning of wisdom. Right here, we're kind of picking up in the middle of the description. Again, I said it starts back in chapter 1. But do you see something here? The beginning of wisdom was at the beginning. The Lord, by wisdom, founded the earth. Wisdom existed when God created what we talked about last week. Wisdom was there at the beginning of everything we have surrounding us. So, it's kind of a saying as old as time. I think wisdom's kind of as old as time, right? But also, and I know I've shared this before, this just baffles me. Wisdom is what most, scholarly people would call personified here, right? Did you catch that? She's a her, she. And I just think that's incredibly fascinating, because when you look at chapter 3, and again when we look in chapter 8 and 9 here in a minute, she is talked about like she's a person. She's talked about like a woman that's there with God at the beginning of time. I just think that's fascinating. I don't think I can go too deep into speaking if women are more wise than men. I'm not going to go down that path. But it is interesting to me that she's a woman. That might be a tough one for us to swallow. And sometimes we kind of wrestle with personifications and like if they're a real person or if this is an example given to us by God. And some of them we can really understand. Like Jesus, he is a he because he was a man. We can prove that, right? God, he is a he because he's talked about as a he. He's a father. But this one I think we don't think of often. Wisdom. She is a she because that's how God is describing her, right? Lady Wisdom. And that's why I have this nice little graphic in the corner. That who knows what wisdom looks like, right? But she was there with God to build the earth. I think that's so interesting. And it's not only there, it's also, like I said, in 19 of chapter 3 as well. This is what we read. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. But it's also later in chapter 8. So if you want to turn a couple pages with me, we have this same continued description in more detail about Lady Wisdom and her being there at the beginnings of time, at the creations of earth. Proverbs chapter 8. Let's go ahead and start in verse 22. Talk about how wisdom was there at the creation of the beauty around us. 8:22 through 31. This is wisdom speaking herself here, and she says, "The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up, at the first before the beginning of the earth. Where there were no depths I was brought forth, where there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth. Before he made the earth with its fields, or the first dust of the world, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, and when he established the fountains of deep, and he assigned the seas its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, I was beside him, like a master and a workman. I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the child or children of men." Wisdom was there at the foundations of the world. Like my ESV version says, God possessed her. And we think kind of weird because we think like scary possession. But that means God had her, right? He had her. She was there. They were together. She was there with God before the circle of the earth was drawn. I love that. That's just such a great wording, right? Before the circle was drawn. She was there. She helped create. She was a workman. God's right-hand man, if you will, is a woman at the beginning of creation. But what I think is so neat about this is we can often talk about the creation and the mountains and everything around us, even ourselves. And because of our cultural context, we just think, it just kind of accidentally happened. But God didn't accidentally create everything. Instead, he had wisdom as the right-hand workwoman to put it together. It's not hastily done, it's not sloppily done, and it's sure not an accident. Instead, it's thought through with wisdom and then created. And after God created it with wisdom right here, helping, they sit there and they rejoice in it. And they rejoice not only in the earth, but what was the part they really rejoiced in? Did you catch it? The inhabited earth and mankind. That's pretty awesome. Again, reminding us that we were the special part of creation as humans. We were the ones worth being rejoiced in because we were made in God's image. So this is kind of the section, if you haven't caught, where I get pretty nerdy. I think it's just so interesting that wisdom is a woman. I think it's so interesting that wisdom was there at the beginning of time with God. And probably too nerdy for you guys because it doesn't really matter, does it? The point is that God made the world with wisdom, and he made it with planning, and you're not an accident, and nothing around you is. But instead, God's right-hand teammate was wisdom. But the coolest part about wisdom, I think, is that wisdom is not exclusive to God. Wisdom helped make the whole world. She was his right-hand helper. But she's not only for God. We don't know when God made her or how that happened. We just know it was before everything else. But at that time, before anything existed, wisdom was made to be given. Whether it's been given to make the world or given to you and I, wisdom is not just for God alone. Wisdom is for the humans that they made as well. I think that's maybe why it's so cool to see that wisdom and God are rejoicing over humans, because wisdom says, look, I get to work with those guys for the rest of my time. And I just think that's so interesting. But here's the thing. In chapter 1 of Proverbs, towards the last half, if you will, we start to see the description of wisdom. The last half of Proverbs chapter 1, after the introductions and stuff, we see that she is there, and we can read kind of the heartbreaking introduction. The heartbreaking introduction to wisdom is that she was there at creation, and she was all of that, but the introduction she has is, I stand at the gate of your cities, crying out for people to listen to me and to walk alongside me. And the introduction we get to wisdom is, I cry out to them, tell them everything I have to offer, and they ignore me. That's how we're introduced to wisdom, is that we ignore her. We ignore this thing that God has made for us to have in our lives. She's begging, crying out, say, hey, come with me. And we ignore her. What a sad, heartbreaking introduction. She's standing at the city gate, and we just reject the knowledge and wisdom that God's trying to pour on us. I don't know about you. I've done that before. And usually you can tell things that when you look back, you can tell when you've rejected wisdom. Most of the time you don't realize when it's happening to you, right? You're walking by the gate and you don't know who's hollering at you, but it was wisdom. So I can relate with that. And it's just so heartbreaking. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 24 is where that's kind of all comes to a head. And she says, I have called you and you have refused to listen. Not proud of it, but sometimes I feel like I've done that before. Have we done that before? Yeah, I think so. I think humans do that. So wisdom wants to walk alongside us. She wants to be in our lives. She's not just for God. She wants to be with humans as well. But yet we reject her. Maybe we decide we have a better wisdom than what God created. And so we just reject her and walk on by. And instead we walked in what some people might call stupidity or foolishness, or my ESV says folly. See, the problem with rejecting wisdom is that we walk with somebody else. And this is kind of a nerdy thing that I also see in the beginning of Proverbs, but Lady Wisdom's not the only personified person in the beginning of Proverbs. In fact, if you go all the way through chapter 9, the end, you'll see that there is a Lady Wisdom and a woman folly. Woman folly is described throughout the scriptures as an adulteress. She sits at her house and calls you as well, but she calls with lies and deceit. And I see that, and I read about these two ladies, either one I could walk alongside with. An adulteress who lies, or wisdom who is created by God that wants to guide my life. And they both are calling. But yet sometimes I feel like we walk with folly. Because she has lies, she has deceit, and we think we have wisdom. But really, we just have Satan's guiding hand, named folly. So I just find that incredibly interesting, how there is, especially in chapters 8 and 9, there's Lady Wisdom, there's woman folly. We get to choose which one we walk alongside with. And we actively make that choice every single day. We make the choice to be stupid or wise. Don't know how to say it a different way, right? And sometimes we miss it. But we want to walk with wisdom. Do you guys want to walk with wisdom? Do I need to prove to you that we want to walk with wisdom? Because she does. I think that's pretty cool. Like if a person full of lies and deceit didn't sound good, here's some reasons to follow wisdom. She's got some good things, right? Proverbs chapter 3, back where we were. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, and profit better than gold. Oh, she's better than silver and gold. All right. Silver and gold are pretty nice to me. If you're going above that, that's awesome. Not only is she more better than silver and gold, she's better than jewels as well. And nothing I desire can compare to her. So you're telling me that everything in all creation, no matter what I could get, a Lamborghini is not as good as wisdom? Man. But even better than that, long life is in her hand, her right hand, and her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and her paths are paths of peace. So what does having wisdom look like? It looks like a long, fruitful life with honor, but it also looks like a pleasant and peaceful life. That's kind of mind-boggling, isn't it? Because usually the people with riches and honor did not have a pleasant, peaceful life. But yet, wisdom can take you to all of that if you walk with her, right? It's pretty incredible. She has some great things to offer. She has some amazing things. She's worth following. So, do you want to hang out with folly, or do you want to hang out with wisdom? I think the answer should be we want to hang out with wisdom. Look at all the great things she has to offer, and she's crying out to come with her. It's pretty cool stuff. But how? That's the question. It always is like a pivotal point in my sermons. How? If wisdom is calling out and she looks pretty good, I want to hang out with her. How do I get there? How do I walk alongside her? Well, you guys probably know where I'm going with this one. But let's read here in Proverbs chapter 2, verse 5 through 8. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 5. Then you will understand the fear of the Lord and the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom from the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. So how? How do I get wisdom? Well, the Lord gives wisdom. How do I get wisdom? I've got to go to God. There's some challenge and some encouragement in this verse, right? The challenge is I've got to go to God and fear him, right? Understanding the fear of the Lord, and I'll hit that again in a minute. We have to fear God. That's a challenge for us. So we have to fear him and know him and be with him. But if we are with him, he will give understanding and guard us as we walk our lives. I love the very end there, right? He guards the paths of justice and watches over the way of the saints. It's how I feel when I'm walking this path of life. I want somebody guarding the way and watching over me, right? God can do that when he gives wisdom. But there's a challenge in the fact we have to fear and know him. So if I was to simply tell somebody, how can I have wisdom? The simple answer would be fear and know God. And I don't mean that in a scary way. I mean that in a deep relationship way. Fear and know God. Because he will give you Lady Wisdom. And she looks pretty good. So for that reason, I think there's actually two beginnings to wisdom. There's the beginning of all time, wisdom was there. But I also think there's a beginning of wisdom for each and every one of us, right? And we might think we have wisdom fresh out of the gate. All of us have been teenagers before. But I don't think that was real wisdom. I think the real wisdom is the one that God gives, right? So how do we get that second beginning of wisdom? Well, Tricia said it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. How do you get it? Fear and know God. Have a real relationship with him. And you probably saw that back in this verse here in Proverbs 2. Then it's here in Proverbs 9. And guess what? It's other places too. The psalmist would say, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. Sounds about the same. All of those who practice it have good understanding. His praise endures forever. The beginning of wisdom, right there in you and I, the fear of the Lord and knowing him. That's what I think we need to do. So it's wisdom, her very first beginning, at the creation of the world or even before it. Pretty cool. I think that's so neat. But I don't think it's as powerful as the fact that the beginning of wisdom can start for anybody at any time when they start walking with God. When they fear the Lord and they deeply know him, you can have real wisdom. And I think a lot of times we get kind of tricked into folly's plan. We get tricked into thinking we have wisdom, but actually we don't know God, so we don't have real wisdom. There's a difference between folly, worldly wisdom, and godly wisdom, which is truly wisdom. So I think there's two beginnings, and that's absolutely fascinating to me, that she was there at the beginning of time, but she could be there with us right now. So again, it can be challenging because now I have to ask myself a question. Maybe you guys get to ask yourself the question as well. If wisdom can have a beginning in my life, I just have to fear and know God. Do I really fear and know God? Every day? Maybe that's why some days I'm dumber than others, huh? I don't know. The challenge is every day I need to mend and build my relationship with God because I fear and know him, and I'm not going to let that go by the wayside. The benefits of wisdom are just one of the benefits, right? So I need to be challenged to fear and know God every day and have this relationship with him every single day. I need to know him personally. And that's a question I think maybe you get to ask yourselves too. That's for you and God to talk about. I'm sure you will. But do you really have wisdom? Because do you really know God? And so, some people struggle, and whether you're watching this online or you're in person, we struggle with wisdom. We don't know if we're doing the right thing half the time. I get it. But I really think there is peace in wisdom when it comes to actually knowing God. So, if somebody asks you, where do you find wisdom? You can take them down the quick path of the Bible, Proverbs, fear and know God, and walk alongside him, right? That's how you have real wisdom. So, if you don't feel like you have wisdom, you have brothers and sisters here who are walking alongside you with wisdom to God. And if you've never felt like you've had wisdom before because you don't know God at all, right now is your opportunity to ask one of us how to start walking alongside, knowing and fearing God. So I just wanted to talk about the beginning of wisdom a little bit today. I know I can kind of be a nerd when it comes to Proverbs chapters 1 through 9 because it's so fascinating to me. But wisdom, she was there at the beginning of time, and she can be there with you at your beginning every day if you know and fear God.